In my new book, Jesus and Divine Christology, I take on what might be one of the most important questions that any Christian can ask and answer, and that's this: did Jesus of Nazareth claim to be God? Did Jesus claim to be more than merely human? Did he claim to be divine? Now, you might think, well, of course Jesus claimed to be God. But if you look into the scholarship in the last 200 years or so, that assumption that many Christians kind of take for granted has actually been called into question over and over again. And so that for the last 200 years or so, many skeptical scholars have actually argued that Jesus, in fact, never claimed to be divine, that he saw himself as merely human, and that it was later Christians, it was the early church, that anachronistically gave the claim of divinity and they placed it back on Jesus's lips and placed it in his mouth. In fact, if you ever took a college level course on the New Testament, you probably were introduced to the idea that if you look at the Gospels, the first three Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus appears as merely human, and that it's only in the Gospel of John, the fourth Gospel, the latest of the four to be written, that Jesus makes explicit divine claims like, I and the Father are one, in John 10, or before Abraham was, I am, in John 8, where he takes the divine name, I am, as his own. And so if that were correct, the score, so to speak, in terms of humanity and divinity, would be three Gospels in which Jesus is merely human, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and only one Gospel, John, in which he's fully divine. So the score would be, 3 against 1. But what I show in this book, Jesus and Divine Christology, is that idea that Jesus only claims to be divine in the Gospel of John is a modern myth. It's not true. And in fact, in all four first century biographies, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Jesus does in fact claim to be divine. He claims to be the one God of Israel come in person, but he does it in a Jewish way, using riddles and allusions to Jewish scripture, and performing actions that in a first century Jewish context would have been understood as implying that he was much more than merely man, that he was in fact God made man. And I also show that the clearest proof for this is the fact that over and over again at the beginning of his ministry, and then of course at the end in his final trial, Jesus was accused of blasphemy in the context of questions about his identity. And although Christians will sometimes assume, he was accused of blasphemy for claiming to be the Messiah, that's not true, because it wasn't blasphemy to claim to be the Messiah in a Jewish context. The Messiah is just the anointed heir to the throne of David. He's a human figure, he's special, but he's merely human. So if the Messiah couldn't claim to be the Messiah without being charged with blasphemy, how would you ever know who he was? No. In fact, it wasn't blasphemy to claim to be the Messiah in a first century Jewish context, but it was blasphemy to claim to be God. And in the final chapter of the book, I show that the reason Jesus was executed and put to death on a cross was not only because he claimed to be the Messiah, but because he claimed to be a superhuman Messiah, or as I put it, a divine Messiah, a divine Christology. So, if you've ever wondered about the foundational belief of Christianity, namely that Jesus is both fully human and fully divine, but you've wanted to explore it in a scriptural mode to look at the biblical roots of our belief in Jesus' divinity, then this book is for you.